How's it going, Panthers? I'm Ingrid Lee reporting for BRJL 103. Today, I am joined by Rowena Chiu, a recognized activist of the hashtag #MeToo movement, a victim of the Weinstein scandal in 1998, and is portrayed in the film She Said, coming out Friday, November 18th. So, Rowena, I know you have been very vocal and open about what has happened regarding the Weinstein scandal, but originally you had actually signed an NDA or non-disclosure agreement regarding your encounter with Harvey Weinstein during that night. What were your thoughts when you signed the document?
My thoughts on signing the NDA. Well, obviously, the process of negotiating the NDA was very onerous and oppressive, as has been covered in the press a lot. Um, we had originally wanted to report Harvey to the police, get some internal investigation going at Miramax Films, but it quickly transpired that that was very difficult to do. Once we got pulled into the lawyer's office, all of it was really pretty coercive. We were locked in a office for long hours at a time. We were sometimes kept there till 5 in the morning. They applied a lot of pressure on us, legal pressure and otherwise personal pressure. We were told that our friends and family wouldn't be safe. We were told that we wouldn't be safe unless we signed the NDA. So of course it was a pretty terrible feeling to sign it. I would say that we felt very powerless. I would say that we felt incredibly frustrated and angry that the legal system didn't stand up for women, young women. We basically felt disbelief, really, that he could get away with this kind of an agreement. I think it's quite public now that our agreement contained terms such as we wouldn't be permitted to talk to a doctor or a lawyer. We wouldn't even be able to keep a copy of our agreement. We wouldn't be able to seek any therapy. We basically had to forget about what happened. There was a list of our family and friends that had known that I worked for Harvey. And so Miramax Films would have kept a list of that friends and family and used them as a way of holding pressure over us.
Yeah, that sounds very terrible, and I'm very sorry that it happened. And you mentioned how you went to your friend, Zelda Perkins, who at the time was also the other assistant to Harvey Weinstein. What compelled you to go straight to her instead of like your close friends or family that you knew longer than you knew Zelda?
Well, actually, at the time that I went to Zelda, we were both away from home. We were both working as part of the Venice Film Festival. She was my direct superior. She had worked for Harvey for 4 years. I had merely worked for Harvey for 2 months. So actually, at the time that I went to talk to Zelda, I actually was asking for ways of dealing with Harvey. I had heard during the interview process that he was an incredibly difficult person to manage. There were lots of questions in the interview about had I worked for difficult bosses before, how I reacted to situations, and so on and so forth. I did not believe that Harvey Weinstein employed bright women with great futures from top universities in order to sexually assault them. I didn't believe that was possible. I did believe that he was a lecherous person and that this was the 1990s. The film industry was a very difficult place to navigate. A lot of us assistants, whilst we didn't think we were going up to the hotel room, to be sexually assaulted, we knew that as part of our work, it was really a question of fending people off, of saying no a lot, of dressing properly, of never being seen, in a bar, never drinking alcohol, never wearing clothes that might be a bit suggestive. And I think that's interesting because in the light of the Me Too movement and where things have moved in the present day, I look back on those days in the 90s and I think in some ways the system was set up to be very victim blaming, as it was always our fault as assistants. It was our job to manage Harvey, to make sure that he didn't get out of control or he didn't behave improperly. And I think broader than that, broader than Harvey, back in those days in the workplace, it was often women's jobs to manage men and their lecherous behavior or their unfortunate comments, or there was very little responsibility given to powerful men to manage themselves. It was the younger women who often had much less power and worked as their assistants or secretaries or managed their travel and so on, who managed the men. And I think that's a very interesting perspective. I hope that this new generation will begin to look at things differently and that the workplace is changing in the light of what the Me Too movement has done.
Yes, and I think this Me Too movement has impacted many, especially those in the workforce. And in your interview with the SF Chronicle Datebook, you mentioned how that many people, like especially women, like they're more easily being like coerced to being quiet because they're going up against someone who's more superior, specifically a male power figure in their workforce. What do you think, like what kind of measures can be taken to ensure that there's a more even power dynamic, especially now with like more upcoming future generations?
Yes, that's right. I did mention that indeed recently in the San Francisco Chronicle, but even 3 years ago, when I first broke my story, I talked in my New York Times op-ed about four power abuses. And I think for my personal situation, there were certainly these four. One of them was, of course, that Harvey was my boss and I was an assistant. So in the structure of Miramax Films, he was incredibly powerful. As Lauren O'Connor has said in her memo, the balance of power in this company is Harvey Weinstein 10, me 0. And I think that applied for every assistant that worked at Miramax Films. And then there was the fact that he was male and I was female. I mean, he weighed 3 times my weight. So people, perhaps detractors of the Me Too movement will say things like, well, why didn't you run? Why didn't you scream? I think that they didn't understand the fear of being trapped alone in a room that was intended to be your office with someone that's 3 times bigger than you. Actually, at that point, self-preservation kicks in and you think, I can't make him angry because I've seen him throw people across a room. So in order to get out, I have to talk my way out of this. I can't fight. So, I mean, that is a very terrifying position, I think. What that really requires is more than just a cultural and societal change.
Yes, and it is great to see how passionate you are, like working to help those find their voices, which like you said, like this is a very sensitive topic. It can be very troublesome for many. And for those who are still struggling to find their voice, I know you go around working with these people to help them find their voice. But what do you think? Like what is the message you want to spread to help these people find their voice?
I also thought, well, the New York Times has people like Gwyneth Paltrow or Ashley Judd who are far more famous than me, and they have, they're far more used to speaking out. They already have a platform and a voice, and I don't understand why somebody who is not known, I was going to say little known, but in fact not known at all, not in any way a household name, not an actress, I'm not an activist, I don't in any way have a platform or even any experience in speaking out. And so I thought very much that my own voice didn't matter. It wasn't actually until I went through this long journey, which took 2 years. And then I agreed to be featured in the She Said book. And I went on the NBC Today show where I broke my story in front of 4 million people. That it wasn't actually until after I broke that story that I truly understood the power of the one voice. Uh, Almost on the day that I broke my story on this breakfast show, Asian survivors whom had never told anyone of what happened to them started to write to me. And I started to hear from people who were maybe 70. And the person who had assaulted them was 100, or would be 100 if they were alive today. But the person who assaulted them was long dead, and their parents were long dead. And they felt that they couldn't or would never be able to talk to anyone that was there at the time or might remember or was part of what had happened to them, that they were alone. And so that they were sort of passing the baton on to me as a daughter or as a granddaughter. And then I also heard from people who were 24, just like I was when I was starting out in the film industry, saying, I'm Asian, I'm 24, I now work in the film industry. I can't handle my boss. He makes me work late. Terrible things are happening in the office while I work late. And I had empowered some of those people to go and report their bosses to HR or to go and tell their parents or to seek some form of accountability. And so I suddenly realized that, wow, the power of one voice, even be it a small voice, even be it a super terrified voice, even be it a voice of somebody who's not well known, can actually make a difference. And so I feel like I say this all the time, but whether you consider yourself a person of some influence, whether you have higher income or lower income, whether you are, whatever color you are, but particularly if you are a woman of color, do speak out. Don't think your voice doesn't matter. One voice can make a difference. Even if you just reach one other person, if you speak out, it's worth doing.
And that is a very powerful statement. And I'm sure that's going to resonate with so many people and help so many people find their own voices. And you mentioned before how the mental struggle of knowing that you can't go to people anymore. You can't go to even a doctor. You can't go to the people who you trusted the most in your life. Like, what did you do to overcome that mental battle? Because, like, obviously for 20 years, you were just alone. And then now seeing that you can come out, you can say your story. Like, how did you reach that point?
You never walk away and truly get on with your life. Of course, it haunts you. I moved to Hong Kong and tried to commit suicide twice. Zelda Perkins moved to Guatemala and worked with horses for 5 years. It doesn't really leave you. In practice, what could we do? Nothing, because we were condemned to this silence. So essentially, what we had to do was to try to bury it. Our own lawyer told us that we should treat this time in our lives as a black hole. And that's what I did. I never referred to it. As you know from the last story, I didn't speak to my husband of 10 years. We were married for 10 years, had 4 kids. I never mentioned this because we were legally obliged as well as personally obliged not to speak about it at all. So we tried the whole, going away and not talking about it. Fortunately, society understands trauma a lot better these days. We know that there is no such thing as drawing a line. You can't just walk away. You can't treat this time in your life as a black hole, as my lawyer, who was very well meaning and on my side, told me, because that's absolutely impossible. And I think that some education for both culture and society around the idea of trauma, and that trauma takes a long time to overcome, and that trauma that is in darkness actually thrives rather than is healed, is a really important notion. And I think the fact that society now is coming to a place where it understands that better is very important.
That's awesome to hear. And I personally haven't seen the movie yet, but I am so excited to go watch it. And I can't wait to also see part of your story in it. And to kind of wrap up, like for my last question, I'm gonna kind of end it on a more fun note. What is like it's gonna sound like, okay, I know this movie is like it touches on a very sensitive topic, but what is your favorite part essentially in the movie? Either coming from like a film industry perspective or just personally to you.
I've got to say, my favorite part is my husband's scene, of course. He's really the most important
Yes.
person in the movie. I joke about that because I think what one fun aspect actually of this film, one cheering aspect of the film is, although it's a film that has been made by women and is predominantly being watched by women, although I certainly hope men see it as well. Didi Gardner, the producer, Rebecca Lenkovitz, the writer, Maria Schrader, the director, and then of course Carrie Mulligan and Zoe Kazan, who are the lead stars. I mean, these are all incredibly powerful women who are very passionate about this subject, and they've made an incredible movie. But I think the fun bit is there are supporting husbands. They're supporting husbands throughout the thing. There's Jodie's husband, there's Megan's husband, there's my husband, and they all actually bring some comedy and lightheartedness. Actually, there's a great moment where Megan's husband is absolutely astonished that she's got Donald Trump on the phone. I mean, his eyes are literally out on stalks. There's another comic moment where Jodie is speaking to Rose McGowan and she's given her daughter the Netflix password and she's hiding in the room watching TV. And the husband comes through the door and says, "Where are you?" And then there is some comedy, of course, in the fact that my husband is cleaning out the minivan with a vacuum cleaner, which is actually what he was doing. He was actually sweeping Cheerios out the back of our minivan when Jodie Cantor came up to talk to him. And I love a moment outside the LA premiere, a real life moment, where my husband ran into Jodie Cantor's real life husband, Ron. And Ron said to my husband, "Oh, you're the driveway guy."
Whoa. Well, thank you so much, Rowena, for taking the time to talk with me more about your journey, about your voice, and most importantly, taking time to share your story for those who are looking for inspiration to find theirs.
Of
I've been
course.
Ingrid Lee, and I've been reporting for BRJL 103.